What is up, fam? Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful, beautiful Saturday morning. I am here with my little bro, Rohan Chakravarthi. My name is So Real Sunil. Thank you for joining into So Real Sports Talk. Man, Rohan, did we get hit with daylight savings today?
I don't know, man. It feels like it feels like
I don't know.
slow mornings. You know what I mean? Yeah,
It does. It felt weird. I don't know if I felt like I don't know. I felt like it was daylight savings, but I don't think it was.
yeah, no, it isn't. But I get what you mean. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know to be honest what day it is right now. Like, I've been operating on a crazy because I've been traveling, doing all this and all that, and
Uh-huh.
I just lose track of the days. I, it is what it's Saturday
It's
today.
Saturday all day today, brother.
Like,
Yeah, and I know now that you graduated and you're in
right,
that period where you don't have school starting for a few months maybe. So it's kind of like all the days feel the same because there's not really stuff going on, right?
exactly. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Enjoying. The weather is getting a little more hot, which is actually I don't know. It was really hot last week, but then it started to cool off a little bit. So yeah, I've just been enjoying it. I've been on vacation for this past week. Haven't didn't really plan anything, just chilling, man. So just enjoying life, my man. But let's check out some of these guys real quick. None about nature, Sir Lance, the king of the NFC. Thank you so much for joining in, and like you say, sir, all hail the king. We got Spy Nick Danger. Go Niners. Go you, sir. Thank you so much for joining in. Look at him. He's pumping us all up. Go Sunil. Hit the like button. Love it, guys. Love it, love it, love it. So, Rohan, we're kind of in that period of time where there isn't really that much going on, right? Mini camps just got done. Probably not too much going on till training camp. But the 49ers did last week come out with their state of the franchise. I haven't been able to talk to you since that happened. So I kind of just wanted to get your takes, man. One, I'm sure you got a chance to look at it because you got to write for it for WebZone and whatnot. But what were some of your biggest takeaways that you saw from the state of the franchise?
First of all, what the heck? Like the like it was surprising, right? I was talking with a couple of people. Not many people knew that State of the Franchise was getting released on this Wednesday, right? I actually found out a couple of weeks ago that, like the week before that it was recorded, I actually found out that it was going to be that Wednesday. But then when I reached out to other people to see, is it actually happening this Wednesday? Nobody had a clue. And so rather than it being a live event, rather than fans being able to go, I know some season ticket holders were able to go, but rather than it being a live event, one sec, sorry about that. But rather than it being a live event, like it was crazy, right? Because it just gets recorded, it just gets released, and everybody finds out at the same time. So that was like the interesting part. But based on takeaways, I mean, I liked what I heard for a good portion of the time, right? You hear about what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch have to say. You hear about what the receivers had to say. That was like the energy part, right? You ended off with the energy. Then you got to hear, like, I mean, nobody cares really what Jed York and have to, but like it is good to hear once again some reaffirmations at this point at this stage in time about certain topics, right? Like specifically, I heard what they talked about Drake Jackson, how they really like Drake Jackson, and there was one tidbit that I found very interesting. I'll pull up the quote right now because I wrote about it yesterday. But John Lynch talked about how the 49ers stayed pat because there were players that they liked at every pick. And it's a cool thing when a plan comes together. There were some fun moments in the draft, some not so fun, like a player we really wanted and someone jumped us. But that happens in every draft. And I found that quote really interesting because I thought the 49ers, like I look back and the 49ers didn't get jumped that much, at least in the early rounds, right? Like the only time that they got jumped was at pick 60. Remember, it was a storyline on draft night when the Bengals traded up around 10 spots to trade up to get Cam Taylor Britt, the safety slash cornerback out of Nebraska. And so that was an interesting quote for me. Did the 49ers really want Cam Taylor Britt? They're at 60, 61, when many people thought they could have gone safety. What do you take away from that?
Yeah, I was, I'm a nerd when it comes to stuff like that, learning about the psychology and the strategy in the front office. And I thought it was pretty interesting that they gave us a little bit of insight into that. Yeah, I mean, this was the first time in their regime, Rohan, where they didn't do any trades. Usually, one of the telltale signs of John Lynch run draft is they are going to trade up or trade back. And especially when you saw how many picks they had, you expected that they were going to, be a little bit aggressive with that. It was nice to see that they felt like they, didn't really have to reach too much. They just kind of played the board where it was and kind of went best player available or whomever they were most excited about. If they were there, they went ahead and took them. I think this is kind of just more a product of how well they've just been able to do overall roster building, because there weren't like glaring needs, right? As far as they needed a player to fill this hole immediately because they had nobody on the roster as a solution. That wasn't the case. And it doesn't look like it's going to be the case, Rohan, moving forward for quite some time, because they're so stacked and kind of had the next man on deck just based off of how well they're doing with later on in the draft with the depth pieces, as well as, being able to develop their draft picks from previous years as well. So it seems like overall, my biggest takeaway was we're just in a great situation. It just seems so easy to Shanahan and Lynch right now as far as the roster building and the draft. And I think the biggest thing that was interesting for me was I didn't necessarily put two and two together as far as, there was a period of time where it was only John Lynch talking. And we were all wondering, where's Shanahan? Why is he not speaking? There was even, I don't know if you remember, rumors of maybe there's some friction between Shanahan and John Lynch because of all of that. And then Shanahan kind of mentioned it. He was like, usually I want to take a few months off or whatever the case may be, but I just lost a ton of coaches. Right. So I didn't get any break. And that whole time where it was really John Lynch handling most of the media duties and we weren't hearing from Shanahan, it was because he was busy putting together a staff, because he just got decimated with McDaniel leaving, taking some coaches with him, and obviously special teams coordinator left and so on. So that answered that question. And then it kind of sounds foolish for all those people that were saying there was all this friction, when it was really just Shanahan had to go to work doing something that he wasn't expecting necessarily to do early in the offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like the first time, right, that the 49ers have experienced coaching turnover to this extent. And I mean, it was expected given their success over the last couple of years. They reaffirmed that success this year, and they were top 10 in many metrics, both offensive and defensive, despite the fallacies that they had on both sides, right? With the cornerback room, you didn't necessarily have a ton of starting level cornerbacks. At quarterback, obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo had his good, but also had a ton of the bad. So that's why I think a lot of the coaches moved on, be it for better opportunity or just for new scenery in Wes Welker and Rich Scangarello's case, right? But yeah, I mean, you go right back to work right after that. He had to sign a ton of new guys. You have Brian Greasy there. You have Anthony Lynn there, both new faces. He talked about how the process took about 3 weeks, and then the honeymoon vacation phase came along. So that is a good point for you. This is like new waters in a way for the 49ers. I am interested. I think one thing that was telling, though, that wasn't necessarily indicated during this part is Kyle Shanahan played a huge role in the signing of these coaches. I think him and Lynch probably worked hand in hand, whereas a lot of people thought, maybe blame Lynch or something like that. I think they were working hand in hand this entire time this offseason, not only with the coaches, but I'm sure with personnel and all that kind of stuff. And especially during the draft, they were working hand in hand. And so I thought that was definitely telling for sure.
Yeah, and John Lynch mentioned it. It seems like a lot of these coaches are coming to the 49ers specifically because of Kyle Shanahan, which is a really good sign to see. I don't know, maybe the last regime that we've had here with the 49ers where it's been such an appealing place to play, Rohan. And, I think we finally have like the staff in place It seems like, York has kind of fallen into his role as far as just being the owner and not necessarily getting so involved in the day-to-day and kind of just trusting John Lynch and Shanahan to take care of running the organization. And it seems like Shanahan has this reputation amongst the NFL community where a lot of coaches are willing to come in. It seems like it makes a lot of sense, because if you look at what happens to the coaches that Shanahan, develops or in his staff, right? You saw Saleh within 3 years get a head coaching job. You saw Mike McDaniels, in the fourth year or fifth year get a head coaching job. Many people believe DeMeco Ryans. I mean, he got interviews last season. He's most likely going to get a head coaching position here, probably next year. So I could see how, these young coaches who are looking to be developed and then eventually have ambitions to become head coaches realize that the 49ers are willing to develop and allow those coaches to actually get their head coaching positions. So not only are they creating a factory for certain players, just like defensive linemen, running backs, stuff like that, where you can come in, kind of learn, develop, showcase, and then move on and get paid. They're doing the same thing for the coaching staff. So that means that we'll always have young, up and coming talent in the coaching ranks, which bodes well for a team overall.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about the coaching staff, there was one quote that I thought was interesting from Kyle Shanahan. He was talking about the coaches that were leaving and the guys that were staying. And the one guy he actually really wanted to stay was offensive line coach Chris Forster, who I think got a promotion this offseason to the offensive line coach, I think, from whatever role, or he's a run game specialist now, after being purely the offensive line coach last year. And he talked about the transition of how he had seen from Forster before, and really think what he said right was offensive linemen take 5 years with their offensive line coach to fully develop. It takes, the learning curve is a little longer with offensive linemen. And I think he was specifically talking, although he might not have said it, I think he's specifically talking about Mike McGlinchey, right? Who's going into that 5th year where you can really fully develop with a certain offensive line coach if given the chance, and that just takes longer. Whereas other positions, like we've seen receivers develop in 2-3 years, right? We've seen running backs develop quick in this offense as well. And so that I thought was an interesting tidbit, especially given his relationship with McDaniel, that the one guy he wanted by his side here was Chris Forster, given the relationship with the offensive lineman. And he also talked about McDaniel, right? How McDaniel's kind of been there at every step of the way. But now is Forster kind of going to be that next guy that goes, that stands beside him? We saw earlier, right, this offseason, Chris Kosarek said he's completely content being a defensive line coach. I wonder, is Chris Forster going to be that way too, or is he going to elevate in the ranks, try and be an offensive coordinator, and then potentially some other opportunity arises later on?
Yeah, to be determined. And I want to hold on to that point because I think it springs off into another conversation, but want to shout out some of the people joining in the chat section. Niner Sickness Podcast. What's up, Faithful? What's up with you, my man? Thank you so much for joining in. 91649er, my guy, with the thumbs up. Appreciate you guys joining in. And, when you were talking about the coaches and just the timeline and things like that, one of the other things that he mentioned, and I'm speaking specifically to Shanahan, and he mentioned this in a couple of facets amongst the team, is just because you're losing talent and you're replacing them with people that you may not be familiar with, that doesn't mean that you don't have a chance to actually be better than last year. And he said that about the coaching staff. He also said that about the offensive line, Rohan. And that's something that I've been kind of banging the drum on, is just because it's new, just because it's unfamiliar, just because there may be like questions, doesn't mean that it necessarily means worse, right? And I think that a lot of the faithful kind of just are immediately thinking new, unfamiliar is worse. And Shanahan, I thought was pretty adamant. He said that, like I said, in multiple facets when he was talking about the turnover. He was like, I actually believe that we have a chance to be better. And he mentioned that specifically about the coaching staff. He also mentioned that specifically about the offensive line, Rohan. Tell me a little bit about what you felt when you heard those kind of statements from Shanahan.
I thought you said about the offensive line. I thought like it was interesting because like he is in a way admitting a bit, but he's also sharing optimism, right? It's kind of like that two-faced horse that he's been going along. I think I saw a quote specifically. He was kind of combining the running back group, right? He was saying how he feels good about his running backs, and that kind of leads me to another point. He said he our running backs. You saw what Elijah Mitchell did last year. We've got to get him healthier so he can do it more throughout the year. I think Trey Sermon learned a ton in his rookie year, and he's realized, all right, what do I have in this league, and what do I need to improve on? And then he talked about the guys that are missing on the offensive line, right? So for both sides, I think it's like he's trying to share optimism that you could get more, although at the moment it might not be there, right? At least with the offensive line. And when he's talking about the guys that are a little bit missing, right? I actually wonder, does that mean that he envisions a guy like Daniel Brunskill playing a significant role, probably that right guard role, or does he envision does he envision something like different? I'm wondering about that. But speaking about the running backs, he name dropped Trey Sermon, how he learned a ton in his rookie year, and I want to get your thoughts. Do you think that's a little more optimistic? Because I think I don't know about you. I don't want to speak for you, but I have been on the train that Trey Sermon will make this roster. Like I think he's one of the three locks to make this roster, and I think this further solidifies that.
Yeah, Rohan, I'm right there with you. I actually did a whole stream about it yesterday because I'm a big fan of Trey Sermon. I also heard a lot of new noise that he might be on the bubble and not even make the roster, and I thought that would be really, really sad because clearly they give up, some assets to be able to trade up and get him. And I also just believe, he, from what he was able to do at Ohio State, for all of those years, like he could definitely be an asset to this team. It was nice that when Shanahan was talking about the running backs, he talked about Mitchell, he talked about TDP, and he also talked about Trey Sermon, like you mentioned. And I think that bodes really, really well because all three of those guys are extremely young, right? They're all second year or younger, with TDP being a rookie. Obviously, you have Juszczyk there that's going to be on the roster, and I assume they're going to only hold 5 like they did last season. Which, to me, then I was discussing it yesterday. Is it Hasty? Is it Jeff Wilson Jr. or is it going to be Jordan Mason, the rookie there? And if it ends up being Jordan Mason, which could very well be the case because he obviously brings something different than those other 2 running backs. That would be probably the youngest running back room in the league.
Oh, it could be. And I mean, it's not like that would be the finalized, right? Because given how we run through running backs, I'd expect Jeff Wilson Jr. to be on the practice squad, should he not be picked up by another team. But you talked about it, right, Sermon? And to me, I don't know if this rocks with everyone, but to me, I would be totally fine if both scenarios happen. I would be totally fine if the 49ers cut Trey Sermon and before the season. And I'm not saying that because of his play or anything. The reason that I'd be okay if the 49ers cut Trey Sermon this offseason is because they're finally showing a willingness to own up to their mistakes and move on quickly. If they believe Trey Sermon cannot be an NFL level player and does not have the chance or does not show the potential that he can develop, then if they move on from him this offseason, I'll be content with that because they're showing that they can move on. They're showing that they're not hanging on like they've done in the past with certain players, like a Jalen Hurd. But if they keep him on the roster, obviously that shows optimism. In a win now year, they believe that he can contribute, and it matches what they've been saying this offseason about him, and it matches the work ethic that we've seen from Trey Sermon this offseason about him trying to get leaner, about him trying to get quicker, and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Some more guys jumped in. CG Ruthless Sports, thank you so much for joining in, brother. Appreciate the support. Dusty Gold, keep it real, Sunil. You know I always do. Not just real Dusty. I keep it so real, my guy. And then 916. I'm sorry, I meant to take this one. 916 49er. Our run game is going to be nice, bigger backs. Flex on them. We're gonna run people over, and that does seem to be based off of the personnel that they have. They all are pretty much built similarly and have a similar skill set where they don't necessarily have that blazing, 4.3 speed, track speed, but they're all stronger, bigger, 210, 220, loves contact and, breaking tackles that way. So that's why I think maybe a Jordan Mason might be a good change of pace to round it out versus a guy like Jeff Wilson Jr., who seems to be kind of more of the same when you look at those three, if how we're assuming those three are locks is the case.
I want him, man. I want Jordan Mason on this roster. Like Jeff Wilson Jr., I really do hope that we can get him on the practice squad. I hope that no team claims him. But I think that I think that Jordan Mason would be a great addition, despite the youth in this room. I think that like he could be utilized as that third down back that we've lacked in like in years past, and that the 49ers have shown to, or not the 49ers, but Anthony Lynn. He's shown in the past that he wants that third down back. We've talked about it a ton of times, and I think he even name dropped Jordan Mason once. So really, for the 49ers, I think that he would round out the room really well because he moves well for a guy his size. He also imposes the physicality because he's that big. And so I think that it'd be between him and Elijah Mitchell at the moment as that third down receiving back, should it be those four. So he is a better receiver than Ty Davis Price. But to me, I don't think that that's that important because Ty Davis Price just isn't a receiver. He never caught passes at LSU. He wasn't really featured in that role. So to me, that doesn't matter as much. But he is a pretty solid receiver, and I want to see him in that role a little more if he makes this roster.
Absolutely. Great job from the guys in the comment section too. But we'll move on. There's so much more we could talk about from the state of the franchise. I thought it was very informative. I took a lot of things out of it. But there was some other news. Somebody who is a fan favorite for the 49ers, Jaquiski Tartt, did end up signing with the Eagles. Now, this was somebody that, I think the faithful overall is kind of split on Rohan, to be honest. I was somebody who really wanted them to bring him back on a one-year deal. He signed for pretty much the vet minimum, it looks like, with the Eagles. And just because, obviously all indications are that Hufanga is going to take over where Tartt was starting last season, which, you do want to get younger there. But Tartt would be a good insurance policy. But I guess the 49ers were weighing, the growth and development of Hufanga over Tartt, who most likely they would have to start if he was on the roster. But now that Tartt's off, off the books, he's no longer going to be, there's a chance for the 49ers to sign him. How much do you think this affects the 49ers as far as the depth there at safety in case, God forbid, one of these guys gets injured?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think it affects it one bit. I think I've been pretty clear, and a lot of people have been pretty clear that, like, I was with you. I was with the group. I wanted Jaquiski Tartt back, but that wasn't going to happen. Like just based on how the season ended and things like that. Like a lot of people don't want to point to it, but that dropped interception was just a scapegoat for letting him go. I think this split probably was going to happen a season earlier had the COVID season not happened. Because Tartt, after getting that $6 million deal, it didn't seem like the 49ers wanted to pay him again. Remember, they only paid him the veteran minimum last year. And then after a season where he played 14 games, they didn't bring him back. And so I don't think it changes the building a bit at all. I think the 49ers have said that they're pretty content. And the second they signed George Odom, I think it was pretty clear that Jaquiski Tartt was not going to be a 49er in 2022. Now for the Eagles, I think they get a great player that can start for them, that can contribute to their secondary, which has significantly improved this offseason with the addition of James Bradbury and things like that. And I think he's a pretty good scheme fit too. He can fit in, in the box at times. He can fit in the back over in the overhang position at times as well. So I think he's a good fit there. But I did think that Jaquiski Tartt was not going to be a 49er in 2022. He hasn't had a 16-game season in his career. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. And the 49ers, they've had a youth movement this year. They prefer other players and they want special teamers like a George Odom or Hufanga while the other plays in that safety role, whoever it may be when they start.
Is there a team that's had a better offseason than the Eagles? I mean, they brought in A.J. Brown, James Bradbury, now Jaquiski Tartt. These are all three high impact players, I believe, to a roster that already was pretty good. They seem to be very similar to the 49ers in the case that they have I believe, a Super Bowl caliber roster around a very young quarterback. And if they, depending on how well their quarterback plays, is going to be kind of the ceiling of where that team goes. If they get kind of like how I feel about how Trey Lance is, if they get average play out of their quarterback, more than likely they're a playoff caliber team. If they get good play, now they could be, a Super Bowl caliber team. If they get great play out of their quarterback, they're probably going to be up there as one of the favorites. Very similar to how the 49ers are as far as the team around a young, quarterback. They have obviously Jalen Hurts. We have Trey Lance. So it's going to be interesting to see. My best friend actually is a diehard Eagles fan, so I do have some connection to them. They always seem to have players go back and forth from the 49ers to the Eagles in the history. So they're going to be a team that I think is on the rise in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's interesting when you talk about the Eagles, right? I personally am not the biggest fan of Jalen Hurts. I don't think he's I don't think his ceiling is super, super high unless he fixes the accuracy issues, which have thwarted him. But they went 9-7 last year, right? Were they a playoff team? Were they?
They were. They made the playoffs.
They were the last playoff team last year. They went, I think it was not 9-7, 9-8, and they made the playoffs last year, and they improved this year, right? You talked about the pieces they added. They added a number one receiver, which has been one of their biggest issues in the past on offense in AJ Brown. They've added pieces on defense, and a guy we didn't even mention. They signed Hassan Reddick to their to be a part of their pass rush, which was already pretty good, while bringing back the pieces they had before. They brought back Fletcher Cox after that release maneuver. They brought back Brandon Graham, and so they're going to have a pretty good defense to complement that offense. It's just, how do they implement the run game, which has been so important to them in the past? How do they implement that run game going into 2022? And can they defeat a stronger set of opponents? They're also in the easiest division, though, so that strength of schedule isn't going to be as high as the strength schedule in the NFC West. I'm very interested to see, do they make the playoffs for a second straight year, or does this team falter because of quarterback play?
I agree. And we're going to touch on that in our last topic. But before we get to that, it's been all quiet on the Debo front when it comes to news. Obviously, he was there for mandatory minicamp, although he wasn't necessarily on the field and working out. He's starting a new workout Instagram page that I've been seeing on Instagram. So he's definitely getting his work in with other players in the NFL. But we haven't really heard too much from either side. Is no news good news, Rohan, in your opinion? Or is this still, kind of like a touch and go situation as far as contract negotiations?
Right. And I mean, when we talk about Deebo Samuel, we got to talk about how this offseason went, right? And really the most recent talks. Kyle Shanahan basically just quit on all the rumors that, there was some huge friction. Obviously, there was some tension because there were contract disputes, but he thought that the relationship was always intact. And I thought that was reassuring, the way that he last talked about Deebo Samuel. As it was like to a point where it wasn't really as bad as the media portrayed it. And I think really the actions proved that, right? Deebo Samuel was the only receiver of the bunch still remaining to get contracts to show up to mandatory minicamp. DK Metcalf, that was the biggest surprise. Everyone thought he'd show up based on what he's done this offseason. He went to the voluntary, I think it was OTAs or whatever it was in the offseason, while also working back from foot surgery. So he was there, and then he did not show up for mandatory minicamp, meaning that situation is going down south right now. Terry McLaurin did not show up for mandatory minicamp, and that was expected of him. But Deebo Samuel did show up. I think right now the 49ers have the situation that is the most trending, and this is good news, because I mean, if they can get the contract done first, they might not have to deal with paying more than what DK or Terry McLaurin get. And yeah, no news is always good news in this way, especially when all the news that we've heard before has been bad news, right? A trade request and all that kind of stuff. So I am interested to see how does this situation boil out. And I think by the time that we see Deebo Samuel on the field again, he's going to have a contract and he's going to be ready to play out. This is that time in the offseason where the 49ers really get to these contract situations and both sides really start to work together, because obviously by training camp, when pads come on, you want that deal, you want the security. Otherwise, you risk injury going into training camp, and you don't want to hold out because of the new CBA rules. So I expect the contract extension to be done within this next month or so. And yeah, I think this is trending upward so far.
Now, if we're keeping it, I don't know if you know these dates offhand, Rohan, so I apologize in advance. But as far as mandatory training camp, which is, obviously when people are playing with pads and all that kind of stuff, what date is the day? Like, what dates are we looking at as far as when this deal needs to get done so that Deebo could come in and, start playing with Trey, which I think is the biggest concern for most of the faithful is Trey and Deebo aren't getting reps right now.
Yeah, so I mean, training camp dates for this year haven't been released, but when we base it off last year, it was late July. It was in the last week of July, around the 25th to 29th range of July. And when we see the deals that have been done in the past, meaning Fred Warner, George Kittle, and deals like that have been done at this time, yeah, they come very close to training camp, if not on the day that training camp starts. I expect it to be a little earlier than that because the situation seems amicable right now. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be like in June. I think that this deal, because obviously negotiation, right? You don't want to give in too early on either side. So I expect it to carry into July, but I'd expect maybe June 20th to be around July 20th to be around the date that Deebo Samuel gets the deal. Obviously contingent on whenever training camp starts. I'm not sure of the dates this year.
Got you. I love it. I love it. And our guy, Crypto Ryan Deebo, that like button. Thank you so much for that. So I thought we'd have some fun right now, Rohan. Obviously, right now, like, it's very early. We don't even know who's on the 53-man rosters for a lot of these teams. But there isn't much going on, so I thought we'd start talking about some projections. So obviously, before the 49ers could win a Super Bowl, they got to be able to contend in the NFC. So I want to go through the playoff teams from last year in the NFC. And then I just want you to let me know which of these teams you think will be in the playoffs still, or which teams you think may not be in the playoffs. So we'll start, and I'm just going to go in order of how the teams finished off. Green Bay. Do you feel like Green Bay is going to continue to be a playoff team, or do they have a chance to not make it?
I think they will be a playoff team. It's interesting because that division, you have the Minnesota Vikings, who are the king of chokers, alongside the so you never know, but if they really live up to their potential, that could be a battle in that NFC North. But I do think that they still end up making the playoffs.
Got you. And it's going to be interesting, right? Because this is the first year in a while that I guess Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a bona fide wide receiver one, right? We don't know who is going to be in that position as far as his wide receiver one. I do imagine that he's going to probably just do what he does so well as far as spread the ball throughout, his receiving core. But they did draft Christian Watson. We'll see what he ends up being. But this is a year where he doesn't have that safety blanket with Devontae. So will be interesting to see. Tampa Bay, I'm assuming you probably think they're still going to make it, right?
Yeah. Oh. No, I actually screw Brady. He ain't going to make it now. I think they'll compete for even the 1 seed, not even just the division. I think they're clear favorites in the division, but they should even compete for the 1 seed.
Okay. This is one that's going to be interesting. So Dallas. So let me put this in perspective. So the Dallas, obviously the NFC East is known as one of the easier divisions. I don't know if that's going to be the case anymore because Philadelphia, I think, is probably going to be the most improved team, even though they made the playoffs last season, just with the amount of studs that they brought in to already a very stacked team. And then I think Washington, the Commanders, also have a bona fide starting quarterback in Carson Wentz. I know a lot of people are up and down on Carson Wentz. I still believe, he's a solid quarterback, and in my eyes, he's a upgrade, obviously, to Tyler Heineke. So those two teams, I think, are trending upwards, especially with the defense that Washington's able to put together, and then just overall what the Eagles have done. But do you think Dallas still is able to come out on top of that division? And if not, do they still make the playoffs in your eyes?
I think it is a competition for that division, but I do think that Dallas's schedule is still too easy. They lost a ton not a ton, but they lost a couple of pretty important pieces, right? Offensively, they lose Amari Cooper, their number one receiver, at least on the depth chart, right? They lose their starting right tackle, Lyle Collins, and their offensive line has been an issue for a while, especially with injuries. And now they got to rely on Terrence Steele there to play at that right tackle position. On defense, they lost Randy Gregory. I don't think that that's as significant of a loss, but he was a pretty good pass rusher for them last year, so they lose him as well. And now you're going to rely on a rookie, I think, in Tyler Smith to play left guard, I believe. So it's a lot of unknowns, but the Dallas Cowboys, their schedule is still pretty simple. They play, obviously, in their division a ton. They play the Detroit Lions, they play the Chicago Bears, they play the Houston Texans, they play the Jaguars. They play a good amount of easy opponents where I still am pretty confident that they'll make the playoffs at the moment. It just depends on, are they going to win the division, or are they going to end up being a wild card team?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more hesitant when it comes to Dallas. I think they could be one of the teams that misses it, that were in it last year, just because I do think Washington and Philly also have those same teams that they're playing. And I think head to head, they match up a lot better with Dallas this year than they did in previous years. So next, the Rams. I think you and I are both on the same page. Most likely they'll be in it either as division winners or wild card, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now Arizona, how do you think they end up?
I actually don't think Arizona makes it. At least at this point, I don't think Arizona makes the playoffs. I think in the 7 teams that I have, Arizona ends up falling out. I'll I'll consider them as the on the bubble team, because obviously there are those teams that are right there. Last year, the race was really close with New Orleans Saints. I consider them right now as to be on the bubble, on the verge of making the playoffs, but I don't know if they end up making it. Just that the division is talented, right? And I don't think that they're going to win as many division games as they did last year. Remember, they beat the 49ers twice, things like that. And so I think Arizona, just because of certain things like the division record, like the rest of the schedule as well, they have a pretty tough schedule as well. I think they rank amongst the top. I think they're top 2. I think they're number 2 in strength of schedule this year. So it is a pretty tough schedule for them. I think they're on the verge. But at the moment, I don't know. They're on the bubble.
Yeah, and I mean, usually they are a first half of the season type team, and Hopkins is obviously suspended for a big majority of that first half. So even though they did bring in Hollywood Brown, I still don't think Brown has the same impact that Hopkins has. But when Hopkins does come back, that's probably going to be one of the better receiving cores when you add the other guys that they have there. So it could be interesting. Just depends on how healthy Kyler Murray is, and if he usually is nicked up in the second half of the season. So I agree with you, though. I think Arizona is another team that's on the bubble that possibly could be jumped by some of these other teams that are ascending. Next was the 49ers. How do you feel like they end up? Are they back in the playoffs?
I do think that they are back in the playoffs. I think when I did a record prediction about a month ago, I think they ended up at 11-6. So I do believe that they end up in the playoffs. I think the Cardinals are the 3rd team in the NFC West right now. So yeah, I think they end up making the playoffs. Whether it's the division winner, that is a little more suspect, or a wild card team, but I think they end up getting in.
Okay, and then the team that rounded off the playoffs for the NFC last season, the Eagles. How do you feel like, are they back in the playoffs in your eyes?
Yeah, I think so. Like we talked about it, right? They were a pretty strong team last year. They improved this year with on both sides of the ball. I think that's important. Their offensive line is also coming back healthy, which is important. And then they also have a pretty weak schedule. They're in the bottom five in strength of schedule alongside that entire division. So I think that also plays in their favor.
Got you. So right now, we pretty much agree on, I guess, five of the seven. So we think Green Bay, Tampa, Rams, San Francisco, and the Eagles make it. You think Dallas makes it. We both think Arizona doesn't make it. So that means that there's a chance for one or two teams that didn't make it last season to make it in. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at the teams right now. It seems like there's probably three, maybe four teams that could jump in there. And it looks like New Orleans, Minnesota, Washington, and maybe Carolina. Of those four teams, do you think any of those guys make it into the playoffs?
Yeah, so I have Minnesota making it into the playoffs this year. I know they've struggled in years past to kind of get over the hump, but I think that they'll end up being a wild card team or even in position to win the division. Although I think that's a little less, a little more unlikely. I think they end up just because the roster is stronger this year. They added Zadarius Smith on defense. I think the most important part though is a ton of their players are coming back healthy. They lost a good amount of players last year: Anthony Barr, Danielle Hunter, Michael Pierce. So you get a good amount of that defense that really was terrible last year. You get a good amount of them healthy, and now they're back. And Minnesota defense, that was kind of like their calling card as well. That's what propelled that team to be a playoff team before. I think that they end up making the playoffs. The other teams that you mentioned, I think New Orleans is on the bubble alongside the Arizona Cardinals. It really depends on how does Jameis Winston respond and how does that team play offensively, because defensively that team is really really good, but we don't know what's going to happen to Alvin Kamara at the moment. He could get a suspension. He could I don't know if it already happened or not, but he could get a suspension. He could not, based on his legal issues. But if that team can sustain offensively, they've got a shot to make the playoffs. If not, I think they're on the bubble. And then I think what was the third team you talked about? Washington.
Oh, Washington, yeah.
I think they are the least likely of Arizona, New Orleans, and them to make the playoffs. I'm not as high on Washington as other teams. I think their defense, like a lot of people think their defense is elite, and I don't. I think their defense is all overrated. We saw that last year where their defense did struggle. I understand that Chase Young was injured for the second half of the year, but he wasn't that effective for the first half of his year. I hope that he bounces back. But when you look at that team, you don't know what's happening with Terry McLaurin right now. Is he going to report? Is he going to play for the team right now? That's a question mark. Their secondary, I don't think improved that much this year. They lost Landon Collins in free agency, and so to me, I don't know where this team really got stronger in the offseason for me to really go out and say that this team can be a playoff team. Whereas they were 7-10 last year. The only position is the quarterback position, and still Carson Wentz is extremely inconsistent.
Fair. And then are there any dark horses that you think, like out of Atlanta, Chicago, Carolina, maybe even the Giants? Any of those teams you think made enough upgrades this offseason to be potentially in the playoff picture?
Yeah, so if we talk about dark horses, I can tell you who it's not going to be. Chicago is 100% not making the playoffs. Roster. I honestly think Chicago is going to contend more to be the worst roster in the NFL than make the playoffs. I'll talk about two dark horses. I don't know if it happens this year or not. And obviously, dark horses are dark horses. And I'm not saying playoff contenders, but I think that these two teams could make a little more noise than they made last year when they were the fourth in their divisions. And that is the New York Giants and the Detroit Lions. I think that the New York Giants could surprise people. And if Washington does struggle, I don't know if the Giants end up being third or fourth in division again. But if Washington does struggle, the New York Giants, with that new coaching staff, if they can get Daniel Jones right, that's a team that could win a couple of games. However, they did lose James Bradbury, the key cornerstone of that secondary. So it is a little more on the cautious side. But the Detroit Lions, I think they're going to be better than the Chicago Bears this year. I really do. I think Chicago got worse, and I think Detroit, got better in certain aspects. So that's something that I'm looking to see. But do I think either of them are really playoff teams? No. I think that I don't even know if they're going to make 500 really. But I think that they could make a little more noise than they made last year.
I love it. So it seems like, based off of your predictions, Green Bay, Tampa Bay, Dallas, the Rams, the 49ers, the Eagles, and then I guess Minnesota
Yeah.
or New Orleans. Out of those two,
Yeah,
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Okay. I mean, I think New Orleans has a great shot as well. They had the same record as the Eagles. They lost it on a breaker, and they had terrible quarterback play. So I think Jameis Winston is an upgrade over the quarterbacks that they were using last season. But brand new coach there. It's not Sean Payton anymore, so that's going to be something to have to go through. So yeah, I mean, I think the NFC is going to be pretty interesting and pretty competitive, especially for those last few spots in the playoffs. I think there's 10 teams, in my eyes, 10 to 11 teams that are going to be vying, that could possibly be playoff contenders. Now, I did name this stream, where do the 49ers stack up? So we both agree they are going to be making the playoffs. How high, where do you think the 49ers will end up finishing up as far as ranking in the NFC?
Now, this is an interesting question, right? Because if you're talking about who are the not four, but who are the best teams in the NFC, I think the 49ers rank higher. But then again, you have to picture in, how does the playoff standing work? If you're not a division winner, the highest you can be is 5, right? And so the 49ers, despite probably, at least in my eyes, I think they're a top 4 team in the NFC. The Packers, the Buccaneers, the Rams, and the 49ers, I think, are the 4 best teams in the NFC. I'm not saying that's the order. That was just, I think, their schedule or their ranking last year. But I think that those are the 4 best teams in the NFC. However, 2 of those teams are in the same division. So how do the 49ers stack up in the NFC? At the moment, I'll say that they're a wild card team. They could obviously win the division, but at the moment, I'll just say they're a wild card team just to say it. And so that means that they probably end up in the 5th as a 5th seed, or maybe as a 6th seed, somewhere around there, like they did last year.
So you don't believe that you think the Rams end up winning the division still?
I'll say so for now. Yeah, I'll say so for now.
Okay. So I actually think the 49ers, and this is all contingent on obviously what Trey Lance is capable of.
Right.
But if Trey Lance plays above average, so if he plays average, I agree with you. I think that they'll probably finish anywhere between 3 to 5 if he's just average. But if he plays good, right, I think that they're the best team in the NFC. I think they finish off with the 1 seed and end up with home field advantage all throughout the playoffs.
And to me, I think it is whichever team is the more healthier team over the course of the season, that's the team that wins the division. And like if the Rams are the healthier team, it's probably them. If the 49ers can prove that they can finally be healthy over a course of a season, it's them. So it depends on, like, to me, I don't think it's necessarily the play. I think the play on both teams is really, really good. And I think the 49ers actually match up well against the Rams, right? In certain situations, like obviously quarterback, the 49ers, Obviously, quarterback, like the 49ers probably are in the worst situation at the moment, just based on current projection. But in a lot of other places, the 49ers and Rams match up pretty well, if not better, for the 49ers' sake. So really, whoever remains healthy for the course of the year, because the 49ers are known to have some injury concerns, like we saw it last year with the cornerback position, right? But whoever remains healthy, that's who I think ends up pulling it off in the NFC.
I love it. And my man Fernando joining in. Thank you so much, Fernando, to join in. Right at the end, he says, I'm picking the Eagles to win the division. I'm with you, Fernando. I think the Eagles win it as well.
I like it. I mean, it's bold, and I mean, it's in the optimistic range, right? And I think that it definitely could happen. Once again, I think that division also boils down to health, right? The Cowboys struggled with health last year. And so if this Eagles roster was there last year, I think the Eagles probably end up pulling it off. And so, again, like there are a lot of these factors that aren't necessarily on paper that really, really matter. Health. For the 49ers, it could be cohesion, although it doesn't seem like that's a big issue with Trey Lance at the moment. It seems like obviously he's balling out like everybody, at least all the competent people expected.
I love it. And Rohan, I could talk to you about this stuff for another 2 hours, but I know you got another show you're jumping on here in a few minutes. So I did want to give you some time while everybody's still in the chat to kind of plug away what the rest of your weekend is looking like, and if these guys can look forward to anything for the rest of the week for you as well.
Yeah, most definitely. So be sure to stay tuned. Subscribe to 49ers Red Zone, my podcast with Marco Martinez. Be sure to check out my work at 49ers Web Zone. I've been writing a ton over there. And I stay up to date with all the 49ers news. As for this weekend, I do plan to go live with Marco once. Upcoming in about 15 minutes, I'm going live with Mariah and TL from the that 49er Faithful Lee podcast. So be sure to tune in on their channel and show them some love as well. And then we're back to the regular schedule. Travel is all done, all that kind of stuff. So, the works. Wayne on Tuesday, my boy Sunil on Wednesday. We've got the entire, and I think, everybody in the chat that actually is interested in this, I wanted to plug this. I host a weekly roundtable section where just 49ers fans can come on the channel and just talk some 49ers with a couple of other people. That is going to resume this Thursday. So if you're interested in that, be sure to DM me on Twitter, and we can get that working. But pretty much that's the works for this week. We'll see if any other shows pop up. But what about you?
Yeah, man. So just before I talk about me, at Rohan Chakravarthi, right there is his Twitter handle. So if you aren't already following him, make sure to go follow him. He does a lot. He puts out a lot of content as far as articles for 49ers Web Zone. He's one of the top tier guys over there. And obviously his link to his YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to him, they do great stuff on his YouTube channel as well. For me, on Monday, I think I think Wayne Breezy is going to join on So Real Sports Talk. So that's obviously going to be a good one. And then, Wednesday with you, Tuesday with Jesse and Jack on their channels respectively. And yeah, man, just keep it up. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please make sure you do so. I may go live again tomorrow morning sometime, or maybe not. I don't know, but definitely Monday sometime with Wayne Breezy. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. The chat section was super lit this morning, so I appreciate you guys for that. Like I always say, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll talk again very, very soon. You guys take care.